perspectives on the 2014 legislative session. Let's review a little bit and sort of look at the last 2.5 months in its entirety. First of all, we cannot overlook the reality that it was dominated by the very divisive and unfortunately inflammatory HJR 3. It has not been put to rest. This matter of marriage is going to continue to dog the people of Indiana because politicians decide to inflame their differences. And it really sucked the oxygen out of the session, and I think impeded the possibility of a lot of very major accomplishments. And because HJR 3 was not laid to rest very early on, we've sort of been reduced to these sort of quasi-celebrations over a lot of quarter measures and things that sound good on paper and maybe impact some balance sheets, but really don't do anything to affect the people of Indiana. Now, I do want to give some measured praise for the pre-K pilot project that was put into place. It's going to affect a few thousand kids statewide. I did ask the governor to set aside sort of the provision that would make it a gateway to a larger K through 12 voucher system. He did that. He had the opportunity for a small bipartisan accomplishment, and I congratulate him on that. But we need to keep it in perspective. That is planting a sapling when the state of Indiana needs an entirely new landscape. And while it's a positive thing, it's not something that we can say is going to transform Indiana's children yet. It may one day, but it is a planting. It is not a overall new look. We're simply becoming the 41st state to realize that we need to invest in our youngest kids. We've heard some talk about the $400 million that has been set aside for roads. Before we all start doing cartwheels, let's remember that that money was already budgeted last year. So last year we set the money aside. This year we said, hey, maybe we can spend some of it. We're not going to spend any of it on local roads. Even we have streets here in Indianapolis, streets up in northwest Indiana that are more pothole than pavement. But at least it is a continuation of a bit of a Band-Aid approach that was initiated last session. Let's keep it in perspective about what it really is. It's more talking and possibly in the future more reversion if people like Senator Kenley get nervous about revenue collections in the coming weeks. And then finally, let's talk about the changes in taxation. Those who already have are getting more help. And that seems to be what my friends across the aisle always want to double down on. Let's help those who already have the ability to help themselves and hope that they do nice things to the rest of us. The continuing reduction in corporate taxes here in Indiana is shameless. It's shameless, and there isn't any evidence that will produce a single job. I think that is what is most sad for the people of Indiana is that with these two supermajorities, with this governor all being of the same party, they're not about outcomes. They're not about the idea that the people of Indiana should really be doing better. They simply say that what we have is good enough, and that if we have this business tax climate and the people aren't doing any better, well, that's the fault of the people of Indiana because they've already been giving all the, quote, tools in their estimation. That's not fair. They always want to tell the people that they can't necessarily do any better, but they'll give them a surplus statement that looks good. They'll give them some business balance sheets that look a little bit different. But if they don't have a job, if they don't have health care, if they don't have educational opportunity, that's too bad. You know, if we were going to cut taxes, we could have cut taxes for those who are trying to struggle to work every day. Tax cuts are not the worst things in the world. It's who you're doing them for. We had an idea to increase the earned income tax credit. That was an idea invented by Ronald Reagan. They said no. Instead, they told the guys in the boardrooms that they'll help them out a little bit, and maybe some of those dollars will transform into the prosperity of our citizens. There's no evidence that it will happen. But again, gifts were lavished. upon the most powerful here in Indiana. And I think that that is something to lament and not something to celebrate. We've heard it was a grand slam, maybe more like a bases loaded bunt with a few errors. That's not doing better. That's telling everyone that this is maybe as good as they can do. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Scott,
Abdul, yes, I should have automatically pivoted this direction.
Hey, I gave him Comic-Con to come here.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
with the business personal property tax, do you think local governments will take advantage of the options, or will they take a pass?
Well, obviously we don't know that yet, but what's a danger is that you're going to pit one community against another. I mean, that's always been the concern about just sort of kicking it down to the locals and saying this is your problem. What do they do? What do they do? If one county over is eliminating the business personal property tax, what kind of pressures are going to be felt by the surrounding counties? This is simply going to be a race to the bottom, and the same outcome that we feared from the very beginning, which is reduced essential local government services like police and fire protection, and a shift onto the backs of homeowners, consumers, and workers. The problems are the same. It may just unfold a little bit differently, and that's something that I hope we don't have to fear the worst, but the ultimate policy outcome could be the same.
On the pre-K issue, some of the leadership is suggesting that the pilot needs to play out over a few years to get some data to show to some people in this building that it's working before you can go about expanding it. Is that the right way you think to approach it?
Apparently Indiana's approach has been caution because we're now 41st out of 50 and getting some pre-K investment. I expect that, but look, I don't want to be overly critical because I'm grateful for some of the changes that were made in the structure of the pilot program. But what I hope will happen is that we'll get the data back, we'll recognize that there are benefits to our future best and brightest, and that we'll invest in those kids in the future, but we'll also recognize that there's a lot of additional investments need to be made in education. And if we get kids off to a good start in life, we're also going to realize that investments in things like traditional public schools, full-day kindergarten, vocational education at the high school level are going to pay dividends as well, and that those things are important too.
I'll go
Sure.
with another one. The welfare drug testing bill died in the third consecutive session. Is this something that the legislature should be continuing to spend its time on?
We're going to have to ask Representative McMillan about that because he seems to be getting a lot of mileage out of the issue, and apparently his constituents believe that that's a good idea. I suspect that as long as it's possible to get some in the public to believe that this is a cost-effective program that's going to lift people out of drug abuse when it's really just costing us more money and doing the opposite. As long as it's a good bumper sticker solution, we're probably going to have to keep dealing with it. It's my guess. I do have to credit some in the Senate, though, for taking a broader view of the issue, which they have done now for the second session in a row.
The governor won't commit to signing the transit bill. What do you make of that?
That's not particularly surprising. Let's talk about the transit bill a little bit. The bare minimum has been done on something that's essential for a large and vibrant metropolitan area like that here in Marion County. The transit bill is nothing to get excited about yet. It might be one day, but we got to remember there's no light rail in it, which some were excited about. It's a possible expansion of buses down the road, but that the governor is approaching it from a sideways direction seems to be consistent with his approach on other issues. Whether it suffers the red veto pen, whether the people of this central Indiana enact it, we certainly have a long way to go. Sort of like the pre-K program, it's a possible start in the right direction, but it's a long way from transformation of Indiana into what it could be in the future.
Scott, we look at what happened this year with HGR 3, with the religious discrimination bill allowed in some situations, and most recently with the regulation of unlicensed daycare. Has the Eric Miller crowd lost their mojo in this building?
I think so. I think so. But that doesn't mean that you can count them out. Sometimes movements have successful periods and they have down periods later to regroup and reemerge. So just because they've had some setbacks the last couple of sessions doesn't mean that we won't continue to see these things come back. Sometimes organizations have to learn to adjust their methodology and the things that they talk about before they reattack something from a different direction. So, yeah, I think he's lost a little bit of clout, but that doesn't mean he can't figure out a way to claw his way back.
So he's like Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th?
Well, I'm not going to compare him to Jason Voorhees, but I'll let you do that.
Have the Republicans been sufficiently ambitious with their supermajorities? I mean, they could have done...
No, they haven't, Dan. And that's what... I've said this before, and I don't want it to become a cliche, but the worst thing in politics is getting everything that you want. They've gotten everything that they wanted, and now for them it becomes about simply preserving what they've achieved instead of using what they've been given for the good of the people of Indiana. And that's what's going to happen over time, and that's why it's inevitable that there'll be a new governing coalition will start to reemerge, because you get bloated, you get soft, you become about yourselves and not about those that you're serving. And that's a challenge for the leaders of the two chambers here. And it's a challenge for the governors. You get too much and you become arrogant, you exhibit hubris, and you get lazy. And I'm worried that that's what's going to happen, because that's not what's good for the people. You got to have a vibrant two-party system that's competing. That's what's best for Indiana.
What's the best thing that came out of the session in your mind?
I do think that based on what was passed, the pre-K, that is a seed of hope for the future. Okay, we're late adopters of that, but that is a good thing. I do want to make as upset as I am about HGR 3 continuing, the fact that 29 Democrats and 23 Republicans were able to join together to delete that second sentence from the original version, I do think that is the genesis of a new governing formula for Indiana, and it may not take shape for several cycles down the road, but that's a symbol, I think, of what's possible, of a more tolerant state that is interested in keeping Indiana's best and brightest here after they go through school. So there's always little flowers of hope that can bloom, even on a barren landscape.
How would that play out other than on HJR 3? What kind of policy would be geared towards regurgitating?
I think policies that are more pragmatic and less ideological. That's what we're shooting for here. And that's what I want my party to be. And I hope that's what the Republican Party tries to be, which is just about solving real problems for real people. Being less ideological. We have to stop rejecting new information when it doesn't fit in with our ideology, and adapt and change with the times. And when parties aren't able to do that, the people tend to look dimly on them over the years. But that's what I think Democrats need to be, about solving problems for the future. And I think we need to encourage a few of the more enlightened Republicans to be that way as well. And if we can find new ways to join together, I think we can make some better differences for people down the road.
We became the first state in the nation to legislatively withdraw from Common Core. Can you give us your thoughts on that, what that means for us?
It's a little bit embarrassing. And I have to say, I've never understood the sort of the fervor around Common Core. It's just simply saying that we ought to have a set of standards, and as a nation we can work together to implement those standards. and to move together as a family of 50 states. I think that we have to get beyond the impulse that just because Washington, D.C. says something doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's bad. And we have too many, sometimes on the right and the left, that instinctively think that anything comes out of our nation's capital is bad. I don't know what it says about Indiana. I think that the fact that we keep beating on this marriage issue and we keep beating up on things like Common Core when other states are moving in another direction, it doesn't necessarily shed us in the best light. And I think we need to look for ways to get into a better light every once in a while. And I think people that don't agree with sometimes the prevailing attitudes that exist in the halls of power here in Indianapolis need to continue to amplify their voices so people in other states and the rest of the world see that there's enlightened forces here in Indiana, that we're a place worth being, and we can think progressively as well.
Do you have any thoughts on this data czar that we created in this new department?
Well, no. Okay, I had some thoughts early on. I hope it works okay. That's something that I'm going to be monitoring closely, because anytime you're consolidating data in one particular area, there's always worries about what's going to be done with it over the long term. So I think that's a wait and see. But if it makes government more efficient and work better, I'm not going to say that that's terrible either. I know that Christina Hale was our conferee on that. She's very data-minded. I have a lot of faith in her. And she's one that said that this is something that can work and be positive for our state government. And if we're able to get more out of our tax dollars, both parties ought to be saying that that's a worthwhile endeavor. Everyone, you've been just terrific for. Oh yes.
I have one. And
sure.
The rest of them are going to laugh because I've been asking this to
Right.
everyone. Indiana's meth epidemic is at its worst proportions yet, statistically speaking. And the only thing to come out of this session was a meth lab database. Do you think this was a missed opportunity to tackle a real problem facing Hoosiers?
Well, I'm not a law enforcement expert, but I will say that we probably need to begin refocusing our drug enforcement efforts. And meth is a scourge, along with heroin. You've seen the growth that it's had in Indiana. Its street value has gone down, and for market reasons it's become more attractive to people who might want to try for the first time and then end up getting hooked. So I'm not going to say that we missed an opportunity, but I do want to say that we probably, from a law enforcement standpoint, need to be zeroing in on those things and probably zeroing in less in other areas.
Do you support requiring prescriptions though for pseudoephedrine? It was a bill that just didn't
Right.
make
Well, I've supported changes in the past as an individual lawmaker, but I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't think anybody. I think drug abuse and the effects of it are so beyond the capabilities of any individual lawmaker. That's one where we really have to work together to find the best answers, and it's not partisan because it affects every one of our families and every one of our neighborhoods.
Once again, thank you all for
Thanks, everybody.
wonderfulness this session.